is Bam Pow Comic Con with your hosts, Andrew Glonner
and Chris Ramos,
with feature guest
Josh Wilson.
All right. This is a continuation of our interview with Josh Wilson. And for this next part here, we're going to review Marvels by Kurt Busiek and Alex Ross. This is how I read the book in this big monster edition. Like literally, if you put it upside my head, it's like two of me.
That is huge.
Yeah. And then that's how, Ramos is a
Amazing.
Yeah. And it's funny. We were kind of always looking to review this book, and Chris's like copy that he originally had, he borrowed it. It got borrowed out, I guess. And so forever. I was like, from forever. It's in the void. And so I was like, Chris, I'll just get you a copy. And so there was like a sale on cheap graphic novels, and I was like, this is it. This is your book. Here you go.
coming back home.
Yeah. Yes. Was that so you owned it before, so this wasn't the first time you've read it?
No, I'm always the old guy in these discussions. All right. So I read it. I remember when it came out, I remember seeing it on the stands, because when it first came out in 1995, 1994, I was 15 years old. So I was full steam into comics everywhere. So I remember seeing it. They promoted the heck out of it. I mean, it was everywhere, because at that time, like right now, Alex Ross is like, people know who he is.
Right.
He's the watercolor artist, you know. But back then, no one ever thought of hand painting an entire comic book, let alone in watercolor, let alone saying, I'm going to do this as a monthly series.
Yeah.
So Alex Ross really jumped into the mainstream just based on his skill alone, you know. And after that, of course, he went on to do just about everything, variant covers and Astro City and
Kingdom Come,
War on Crime and all that stuff. Yeah. So he really was catapulted in this. But I remember seeing it. They promoted the like the burning Human Torch cover like everywhere. It was everywhere.
OG Human Torch.
Yeah. So that's how I remember it. And at the time, I'm trying to remember. I may have read one or two issues. I didn't get a chance to read the whole story. And I think that may have been a combination of comics actually selling out in 1994, which is totally true. You know, you could always get your hand on like issue 2 and 3, but like number ones were just gone everywhere.
Yeah, that still happens now too. I mean, I tried to follow some runs, and it gets so stressful to me because I don't make it there in time, and then it's gone. And so like I usually wait for the run to come out in the trade or something.
Yeah. I'll go, you have number 3, number 4. Where's number 1? Where did I pick that up? Oh, it's gone before you thought about the series. Oh,
exactly.
And when this came out, it wasn't like, you know, a mainstream. It wasn't, you know, a Captain America or anything. It was just hey, here's a new format. What do you guys think of reading a comic like this? So it was a little bit of an experiment, you know. But boy, it really caught on. And the copy that I read is the 25th anniversary edition. Okay, it's the deluxe. So it is hardcover. It's got a nice little slip on it. And
nice.
The difference between my copy and Andrew's copy is the 25th anniversary. Yeah, you can almost see the story itself is about halfway through the book.
Yeah.
Maybe even a quarter. And then the rest of it is all script and outlines and notes and all sorts of like character designs and sketches and things like you did in Twilight Custard. It's just fun to have all those extras.
Mine has a lot of that stuff too, and it's fun how they all have different covers, but this says the remastered edition has got a lot of extras as well. But I love how they've all have different focuses on the characters and the different time periods as far as the covers concerned. That's very cool.
Yeah. I mean, it's really amazing to read this in the Monster Edition, not to brag, but you can just see the scope of what Alex Ross was able to do and imagine and like put on the page. And it was epic. That's just the word for it. It's epic. It's huge. And he was able to accomplish a lot and tell like a really in-depth story.
I wonder how big these pages were when he was actually, or the canvases were when he was actually making the page.
That's a good question, because I'm familiar with the sizes of a traditional comic book page. They're all pretty standard size. They're like 11 by 14 sort of. I don't know if he really grabbed giant pieces of watercolor paper like that and just went at it, but maybe.
Yeah, it's curious. It's like when you go
they
visit
just kept it that way for reproduction.
Yeah, it's like when you go visit like the Dali Museum, the Salvador Dali Museum, and you go there and like, oh my God, these paintings are humongous. They're like you need like a huge ladder to get up top. I wonder, it'd be amazing to see a big giant Alex Ross like that.
Tell me get on that.
Yeah, exactly.
Before we go too much farther, Josh, can you tell us your like comic book origins? Like, where did you start reading? What characters do you gravitate towards? Like things like that.
For sure. And I kind of feel a bit like a poser only because I started with the characters before the comics. So like when I was growing up, the big thing for me was the 90s cartoons. Mainly Spider-Man was my absolute favorite. That's still my favorite iteration of Spider-Man. And then the X-Men and the Batman, all those 90s cartoons.
Oh, absolutely. I was right there with you, man.
Yeah, absolutely. And, and then I slowly picked up comics on and off throughout my life. And only seriously over the last like 5 years did I really start to read like some of the more adult, like graphic novels and a lot of stuff from Image, and then going back and reading a lot of Spider-Man because I love Spider-Man. But yeah, so it's just kind of picking it up late in life and going back and reading a lot of the issues and liking the cartoons and then the movies that came after that and just loving those characters first and foremost.
Right. It's kind of surreal to think that now they're picking up X-Men 97 with the new animated series, and then the Batman, the animated series, is getting the Caped Crusader tales. Ooh. And Ed Brubaker's coming on to it, they announced. So to write and things like that. So it's a crazy the times we live in now. It's capitalizing on our 90s nostalgia.
I know, give it to me though,
right? Come on, you made it for me. It's good. I'll read.
Well, the funny thing for me, I mentioned I went and saw Batman with Michael Keaton in the theater, and it was funny because before that came out, the only Batman was Adam West.
Yeah.
The last movie was the Adam West movie, right? So like I remember going to see it, and then when I got out, because I went by myself, I was 10 years old, I went by myself. I don't know, I just was like, I'm gonna go see Batman. And people were like, oh, what'd you think? Kind of goofy, huh? It's Michael Keaton, he's a comedian. And I was like, Batman's real.
That was creepy. Those versions are scary. They're not really that goofy at all. It became goofy afterwards after he dropped it, but
yes, but it was just handled well, and I think that's what's happening now with comics too, is that there's this sort of revival of D&D. There's a revival of, comic book movies, obviously, and they're still running strong. And I think they're now saying, okay, this is new comics maybe need some help. In my opinion, they need to grab another audience because they're really still latching on to their original audience, from 30 years ago. Yeah. So they're trying to find what are new characters, what's the new direction, but also at the same time, they have such a huge backlog of a franchise. And I think that's where the collected editions and everything else sort of comes out. And Marvel's is still going strong, I think, because Alex Ross and Kurt, they wrote it as like a love story to fans. It's exactly what it is. As you're reading through it, you pick up almost every time you read it. I've probably read it 4 or 5 times. But every time you read it, something else jumps out, some other piece of like, oh yeah, that's from Fantastic Four, or oh hey, that's a funny little nod. That newspaper title was in, this Marvel run, and and the way they handle stuff. So
yeah, they give you just enough to serve the story, but I mean, like there are a lot of things in there. They really expect you. They don't hold your hand. They really expect you to know the events that are taking place. And there were a couple of them where I was like, "What is exactly happening here?" Like the stuff with the silver, when the Silver Surfer came in and Galactus and stuff. I wasn't exactly sure, what happened at the end of that, and they didn't really go into it because it wasn't about that. It was about the people's reaction and the culture at the time.
Sure, like we know these 4 iconic stories backwards and forwards, but what's like, Chris, you always talked about like in between the panels, what is going on? What is the crowd's reaction? And you are always like putting it, imagining it. And that's how you always like read comics, but like they actually put it and wrote a story about it and like the people's perspective and the photographer's perspective. I thought that was really interesting.
Yeah.
Yeah, if you think about what a typical comic book does, is it, puts you right next to the actual heroes. If the Avengers are having a meeting, you're just sort of standing there with them. And, if they're in a spaceship going out to the cosmos, you're in that ship with them, and so it's like you have no choice but to sort of be this omniscient bystander, right? But Alex Ross really put it out as, everyone's witnessing these amazing people and amazing events, and if a 500-foot Galactus just appeared over New York, it doesn't matter how many times people have seen heroes and villains fight, that's still gonna give them pause. And again, at the time that this came out, that was a really unique way to look at this, of like, what would you do if you ran into the X-Men in a subway? What would you do?
For sure.
It's funny too, because as the story goes on, like you said, the perspective of they're still in shock and all, and every time, and they're scared. But the main character, as he goes on, he does sort of become desensitized, and there's a certain point where he's like, I know that the heroes will come and take care of this, so there's no need to worry. And then right when he gets to that mindset, you get into the Green Goblin, Gwen Stacy stuff, and it turns that on his ear. It's like, oh, okay, the heroes can't win every single time. So it really kind of takes you to the roller coaster.
Really hits home. Yeah, for sure. At the end.
Yeah. So the way the book is structured is it starts out, just for our listeners too. There's 4 issues of Marvels, and it starts out in 1939 with the original Human Torch, which was an android, fighting with the Submariner and fighting with Captain America, and they were
the Golden
fighting.
Age.
I already didn't realize that he was an android. I thought he was a man that person experimented on. Because I heard a comment said something about him being an android, but I thought that was just speculation because there's no way a human could do that. I didn't realize that the character
it was
actually was. How interesting. Okay.
Yeah, so the first Human Torch,
Alex Raymond, I think it is, or Hammond. I think it's one of the
Jim Hammond. Bill, Billy Hammond or something like that.
You guys have amazing recall. My brain does not work like that at all.
Everyone was named Billy back then. But
oh my God.
They made him, and anytime he touched oxygen, he set on fire. So it wasn't really like controllable in the Johnny Storm Fantastic Four sense. It was just an android that was just on fire like all the time. And eventually they joined into the Invaders, which was him, Submariner, Captain America, and Bucky,
a bunch of Golden Age. Yeah, Bucky was there too. Yeah, and a ton of other Golden Age heroes you never heard of.
Yeah, so I mean, what Marvel Comics did was they took all of their heroes and they threw them into fighting World War II before we were even in World War II. They were just like, you're going to go over to Europe and kick some butt. And everyone was like, America isn't even in the war. Well, send all our, you guys go take care of it. So that first era is like, you're introduced to Phil, who's a, I think he's just a journalist at that time, right? He's always been a photographer.
Yep.
Yeah.
And then the next book, issue number 2, is like the 60s, and then the next book is the 70s, and then the last book is, I think, late 70s. It's like when he kind of just continues on seeing the X-Men sort of take over. And it, it's really cool because it starts out with these larger than life, super strong, Prince Namor and Captain America, and then it kind of goes into Spider-Man, Fantastic Four, and then it goes into mutants and X-Men, and you got to get to see how people are reacting and where like the prejudice is starting, right?
Absolutely. I thought it was really interesting how he kind of romanticizes, like we said, the Marvels, all the superheroes, and he thinks they're larger than life. And the art just kind of draws you in as when you see like the Human Torch for the first time and like his case, you're like, whoa, what is this? We've never seen anything like this. And slowly the public is like against it, then it's for it. And then you move on to the issue where the X-Men are starting to appear, and the prejudice was really hard, even though they were so different. They just look different, but they're humans, but they got powers, and they're trying to replace us. But while that's happening, the wedding's going on, and it's something like draws out of like the news today of just extreme different forms of how the media is controlling us and what they want us to see and what's really out there, and how that conflicts with public perception. And I thought Kurt Busiek did a wonderful job like interpreting like Alex's vision of that.
Yeah, and so smart with how people would handle it as well too, not believing it or I just feel like you could drop these characters into today and the populace would act in a very similar way, or drop aliens in on us and they would be, they'd either attack it or they wouldn't believe that it's true. That's kind of what they would default to, it seems like. I thought
absolutely.
Yeah. There's like that fog of war, like, if Italy said, "Oh, aliens came down and they fought us, but our heroes fought them off," everyone would be like, "Wait, what?" Like, we didn't see that. Yeah. Well, what are you talking about? Like, unless the entire world sees it, it's almost like unbelievable that it happened. Like a volcanic
sadly, sometimes
explosion.
not even then. Yeah.
Right. Or even an earthquake. Everyone's like, "Wow, there's a big earthquake over in the middle of."
Yeah, it's hard to believe.
Syria or something. It's like it's hard for us to connect that way.
Sure.
One good thing too I noticed reading it was the way Alex Ross, the way his artwork is it's almost hyper realistic, even though it's very quick watercolor. You could definitely tell that was the beginning of his career. I mean, right now his stuff's super detailed.
Yeah.
But the beginning of his career, it was just fast and loose. And he did it where it's hyper realistic, and you felt like things that I think we as comic book readers would sort of think as not amazing. Like, I guess the Human Torch is a good example, or like the Fantastic Four, a good example. But the way that he was illustrated, it was like, wow, it's very an epic feel, because you're way down on ground level, and these things are happening like over you all the time. Or even when
literally when you get to Galactus too, he is the biggest thing they've ever saw before. And just the different angles they see it, like waist or from his feet up, and then from his like waist up. It's very they just can't fathom it. They think, "Oh, the world's literally ending right now."
Yeah.
Where are the Avengers? That was the thing that really got me. We're like, where are the Avengers? What? Where do they go? They're greatest heroes. They're not here. I thought that blew my mind. And then they're like, "A Fantastic Four. There's 4 of them. They can't do anything."
And Josh, as a writer, I'm sure you picked up on the whole, way the pages are laid out. Andrew and I had mentioned before, I don't know how much Alex Ross has a hand in that, or whether Kurt said, "Hey, this is how I want the exact pages to lay out." Because even in the back of this book, they have a lot of examples of the script. And if you do take your time on it, there isn't really much direction, and it's like sort of, Phil has Baxter Building in his background. He's in a tux. He's heading over with his camera into onlookers, point and gasp. It's like, okay,
Yeah. I think they're generally, as a rule, is not that much description when it comes to that. I mean, I think I probably include a little bit more than most people do, as far as like how I want the shot, the close up, the tight shot, and all that stuff, just coming from film. But I do think when it comes to the layout, it's the artist is not just like envisioning the pictures on the panels; they're envisioning that entire page and how the story flows. They're taking in the data from the script, and then they're interpreting it as the work of art. I think especially when you're physically painting it, I would have to imagine that most of the time the artist is laying out the entirety of the page. And I'm sure there's discussions about it, but I think it largely has to do with their art direction, I would imagine.
Yeah, I mean, I would imagine as a watercolor artist too, that he was like, okay, this is my shot. Okay, like I'm going to start this page. There isn't, nowadays digital coloring and things like that, where you can just sort of erase it right back out, or cut it out.
This is definitely. Oh, go ahead. Sorry.
I think as far as keeping the action moving and the text light, that was a really good balance.
Yeah.
There wasn't text heavy.
I agree. And the art, I was kind of not struggling with it, but I was going back and forth with the entire time I was reading it, because it really is very striking, very beautiful. It to me has a vintage look to it. Even the costumes and such are very much of the time when the story takes place, which I really appreciated.
Yeah.
And the story is, again, very grounded. It's very human. So the only time where the art style kind of took me out of it was during the few kind of intense action sequences, because I don't think it lends itself to very fast movements and stuff. And so when that happened, you can really tell that it's a painting, and that the more grounded still shots are much more striking and beautiful to me than so every once in a while there's a big panel that's like kind of chaos, sort of like when you see like CG in the new MCU movies. Like if you focus on it too much, you're like, what is even going on here? But as a spectacle, right. And then in the individual shots, it has its merits.
Yeah.
And some of it too, I mean, you can tell he had a lot of reference. He had a lot of like reference shots, people that were maybe friends of his, or
the models. He always like uses models in most of his art, which is interesting.
And sometimes it was static. I like when he sort of breaks into his own imagination. Like the Galactus scenes were awesome because they were just crazy angles, different scenes together. He had a lot of like Kirby, montage-y stuff, and he took the story that was originally in the Fantastic Four and turned it into like these are the snapshots of the cooler moments.
It
was like,
exactly right.
It was like a film.
The abbreviated version. Yeah.
It's so interesting. You're looking at a physical painting of someone who has taken a picture, and the person in the story is taking a picture. So it is. I think the art style fits perfectly. If you did this digitally, not that they were doing that, much when this came out, but I mean, it just would not work at all, in my opinion.
Mm-hmm.
Sure. Yeah. I guess, do you guys think this book could have been made today?
Well, I think it could be, but I also think it would have to be, I don't know, I guess, okay, so here's an example. Like Ed Brubaker, I always got to go back to my man Brubaker.
Yep.
So Ed Brubaker's writing is crime noir, and he always throws in a little tiny spin of some sort of supernatural something, right? So you can't have someone like really too crisp or too colorful, because his stories are just not that way, right? So they're just subdued. So if someone were to do this story nowadays, I feel like they could, but they might sort of have a harder time with the line that they can't cross to make it like icky CG looking, because they'd want to make, when the sky is on fire with the Fantastic Four, they'd want to make it like real like that. But, the way that this was done was, I think, taking his time on it sort of instilled that, like that the reader needs to take their time through the book too, because the art form is not fast.
No. And that's why, again, when you get just a couple of those scenes where things are moving very quickly, it needs a little bit more of that sharpness. But I think if you got an artist that worked only in that sharpness, then 90% of the book wouldn't work, which is what this story is. It isn't those moments, in my opinion. And I think if it was made today, it would be kind of a bummer, because it would be through like the lens of a cell phone and like TikTok videos.
Oh no, that is what would happen.
That's
too
maybe
real.
Like selfies with the Silver Surfer behind them and stuff.
I don't want that.
Oh my gosh. And another thing that was funny when I was reading it, when Peter Parker comes on the scene as Peter Parker and at the Daily Bugle, and the photographer. And they're both kind of looking at each other like, oh, he's the past, I'm the future, I'm going to take over for you. And I was like, that's too real. It's like, oh, passing of the torch, that's cool, but wow, it's like looking into a mirror of like, this is what I was, this is not what's coming.
I had to reread that a couple times too, because it comes at you so fast. I'm like waiting for Spider-Man to show up, because he's like on the cover.
And it's only like a couple panels. Yeah,
and I like love Spider-Man so much, and then I'm reading. I'm like, wait, that's Peter Parker, and I went back and reading. I say, okay, that's him. It was very
for sure
surprising to me.
Mm-hmm.
Josh, you should read Spider-Man Life Story. I don't know if you've seen that.
I keep seeing that on the shelf at Mile High Comics here in Denver, and I want to pick it up. It's a similar sort of feel to this?
Yeah, it's cool. What they did was they said, what if Spider-Man, because like if you think of the entire Marvel universe, all of Marvel comics from the Human Torch to the X-Men to like nowadays, I guess technically in the Marvel land, we'll have to look this up, so don't quote me, but it's like 20 years past or 15 years or something. Like time is, I don't know, like they went from the Scroll Wars to the Secret Wars to the, like in every month.
Each issue was
month.
like, so
it
was like a different period.
Not much time has passed. So what Spider-Man Life Story does is it says, what if Spider-Man aged normally? So it shows him starting out as Spider-Man when he was like in his teens in high school, and then he goes to college and graduates, and then he goes on with his life, and then he is in his 30s and he's in his like 50s, and all of his villains are aging with him, and it's like time passes from 1966 to like today. And
I love that.
It was a really cool way to look at the story, because people always think of him as, forever high school kid. And
especially the movies, man, that bums me out.
They're doing that. Yeah.
Because he was like, he was only in high school for what was it, like 20 some issues, and then he went to college, and then he spent a lot of his time in college, but he was not in high school that long in the grand scheme of comics.
Right. Then he just struggled with his rent for 40 years.
Yeah, exactly.
But that's
why they did the Ultimate Spider-Man when Bendis came on. They're like, oh yeah, let's spend more time in high school. It's high school.
Yeah. Let's get the kid back. Get the kid back, and that's what it was.
That was a whole nother thing too.
Another fun thing at the very end of Marvel's, when Phil is taking that photo with his wife. I'm trying to think of where that is. Like at the end after Gwen Stacy, and he was like, you know what? I think I'm going to just spend more time with my family. And at the end of issue 4, it takes they take a picture with this newspaper boy that's riding his bike.
Yep.
And they're like, what's your name? And he's like, my name's Danny Ketch. And
I was like, that's the weirdest Easter egg you could have did.
So he'll go on to become Ghost Rider.
Okay. I was gonna say, you'll have to explain that to me.
He was the second Ghost Rider. He's the Ghost Rider of the 90s. Ooh.
Yeah, so he's like riding a bicycle.
That's amazing.
Young Ghost Rider.
Now, when Gwen Stacy died, when Gwen Stacy died, that was the end of a certain era of comic books in general, wasn't it? Largely seen that way.
Absolutely. Mm-hmm.
Well, so it made sense for the comic to kind of come to a conclusion, or his life story to come to a conclusion, kind of with that event. Yeah,
because what happened with Gwen Stacy, and I've tried to explain this to like non-comic book people of just like, Spider-Man, because before Spider-Man was, Fantastic Four and Captain America and Iron Man and Thor, and and whatever happened, and you never really had like true loss, like real loss. Really. That wasn't somewhat reversible. And then they got to Spider-Man, and they said, okay, listen, this is a regular kid who had no dreams of becoming a superhero, and then he gets bitten, and now he is a superhero, and he loses Uncle Ben. He loses his chance of having a normal life. He loses most of his friends because, some of them turn to villains, and so he just has all this like loss on top of trying to pay his rent and pay Aunt May's mortgage and get a job and have a bike, and then just when you think everything's kind of going well, in the comics, then Gwen Stacy dies, and it's like she was before MJ. I mean, she was like the girl, right? So and I was just telling people when that happened, I mean, comic book readers were like, well, that's not gonna stay that way, and then it did, and it was like, whoa, it just took a while to sink in. And it's sort of like, a good novel or a good storyline sets a rule, and they either break it or they never break it. And when Gwen Stacy died, it was like that was broken, like that rule was broken, and that she's not coming back. And so then comics sort of took that as like a reason to get more serious. You know, they took it as like, if they did it to Gwen Stacy, the stakes are raised and we're going to write some serious stories. And after that, it did get a little serious getting into the 70s and things, and, you know, and starting to build on, like, you know, Neil Gaiman and some of the bigger boys. You know, it's like they got serious. So yeah, Gwen Stacy really did do a big shift. I don't know. They kind of reset the stakes a little bit.
That's so interesting to hear you explain it that way, because I watched The Amazing Spider-Man 2.
I'll be right back. You keep going.
Okay. I was watching The Amazing Spider-Man 2 with an 8-year-old, and when Gwen Stacy died at the end of that movie, his first instinct was, oh, she's not dead, or, you know, she's not actually dead, or she's going to come back. And that's so interesting. It's the same exact thing as you're describing when you explain that story when it was happening to people reading the comic book.
Well, and it was also a real true human, you know, so like, you know, there's been deaths in the comics, but then it's like, oh, that was a Skrull, or, oh, that was someone else, or, oh, that, you know, like you never really felt like it was someone that was close, or maybe it was like the uncle of a sister of some hero, and he's like, oh, but that one was like the first time they spent a long time building up a character and then just boom, you know, like, and there's probably the best page in a Spider-Man comic ever after that happened, when Peter is really sad in his apartment. He's just beside himself, and like MJ comes in and he kind of tells her just to get out of there and leave him alone. And then she goes to like walk towards the door to leave, but then she closes the door and stays. And that was like a really, you know, cool way for the comics to just sort of start start real emotions that, you know, you would want in a comic. So it led up to a lot of stuff. I mean, really, Spider-Man changed fully as a character. So yeah,
it's definitely those flaws and that realism that makes him my favorite character, like, of all time, through any medium. Honestly, I just love him so much.
Oh yeah, totally.
And absolutely. You know, even jumping back to Marvels too, they kind of, I think Kurt and Alex Ross, they know these characters are important to everyone. You know, I mean, when this came out, so it came out in 1994, they did the 4 issues, and then they came back to it and they wrote an epilogue, the very last issue there, where he is, where he meets the X-Men, like at the tree in New York. Remember that at the very end? Alex Ross and Kurt got back together in 2019, and they wrote that single issue. So they came back to it. Yeah. So like this all came out in 1994, and then they came back to it in 2019 and wrote the epilogue, which is kind of cool. It's like they wanted to finish this story, and you could tell Alex Ross's artwork changed dramatically in that, like that end part. And they just, I don't know, it must have been knocking around in their brains all these years to say, we want to tie this up, you know, we want to put this back into a little bow and say, you know, Phil didn't just retire, but Phil looked back on a whole lifetime, and now, you know, passing the torch on to everyone. I think it's a good way to kind of think of it.
You guys, I don't think mine included that.
The digital one?
Same here.
Mine
so you might have that in the 25th.
Yeah. Oh. Wow. I need to check that out.
Yeah, it's really you might. Yeah, it's really cool. It's mostly, I mean, the gist of it is Phil reappears with his family, and they kind of go to New York, and they bump into like Wolverine and Cyclops, but they're just people. They just bump into like regular people, and then we know them as the X-Men, so we're like, hey, look, there's Storm and everyone. And he's just there with his daughters, and his daughters are taking pictures, and the X-Men, a Sentinel appears, and the X-Men take care of it. And Phil was like, hey, look, you know, they really are doing good, kind of. That was like the idea.
Sure. Yeah, I do think they needed a redemption of all these, when they did have their issues came up. They were trying to figure out like the segregation thing and the fearing of the X-Men and how to come to terms with it, but they never really, I guess, solved that at the end. Yeah. So it was, I guess that's really cool to hear that they did actually give them some justice at the end and show that they are heroes.
Yeah. And he thought like, about like, oh, you know what, maybe I'll come back and start taking some photos for a newspaper or whatever. But then he like looked around him, and like everyone was like cheering and happy, and he was like, they don't need the media, they just need themselves or something like that. So it was just a nice way for all of these little, because they did just leave it as prejudice is prejudice, and
real social issues.
Yeah, you don't
roll credits.
Yeah, just reading this book, you really don't get the feel that X-Men are heroes at all. Really, I mean, a lot of it is villains. You know, you get that little snippet with Professor X in that interview that he has, but other than that, it just seems scary.
Yeah,
for sure. Especially when they were trying to hide the little X-Men girl, and they were trying to protect her, and they're like, "Oh, she's gone." She's like, "Oh, I just wanted to protect you guys. I didn't want all of the problems with my world to come into yours." That was so heartbreaking too.
It was
like, whoa, that's powerful.
And they said that she just went away. They never brought her back as like a future character. Yeah. She's not like secretly some other X-Men mutant. She's probably just, I don't know, went underground or something.
Yeah. Who knows? Someone could still write the book.
Yeah. No kidding.
There you go. It's an open storyline for Hickman or someone.
Exactly.
Oh my God! Don't say that. He's gonna
bring it in.
That's funny. I was taken by the Cyclops thing too, because when they kept going back to the point when he was saying they're not worth it, and they never gave him any redemption either. He just seemed like not a good guy at all, which I didn't know. I think he was just kind of hearing that sort of out of character and out of conversation as just a comment that Cyclops made. Because correct me if I'm wrong, but was Cyclops ever a villain or on the bad side of things through the comics?
Not till much later on in like comics. But I would say that probably in the early 60s with Stan and Jack, like they weren't like going, I mean, they were obviously saving the day, but they were like always feared, always getting pointed at, always doing that. It wasn't, I think, till Claremont kind of started to break some of those social issues down and kind of extrapolate on a little bit, that the X-Men were more humanized and like lots of cultural issues were addressed and things like that, and kind of moved the story more.
I always found that interesting because some of them obviously look very different, but a lot of them, their powers don't change their appearance. And so to have a prejudice based on whether it happened, you were born with a superpower, or whether it happened through some kind of freak accident, which is the other side of the coin.
Yeah, that's another
prejudice. Yeah.
I think also Cyclops just built a thick skin like instantly, and he saw himself as like, he has to protect these kids. You know, he was sort of the natural leader because he just said, I'm going to take all this burden on myself. And he was just always serious. And that's why a lot of people didn't really like him, because I think he just never loosened up, It was
it wasn't until he moved out of the X-Mansion when they graduated. Starting to loosen up a little bit.
Moved to X Factor or something. I don't know. But that was just their shtick at the time, was just everyone hates you all the time. And if you go out in public, you're not going to be happy. And so they just kind of did their job and sort of, blended away. I mean, they didn't have like the Ninja Turtle mentality. They did their jobs and then they went back to just being not very exciting, I guess. But it's funny, they show the personalities of each character in this book too, very subtle, and they only have like one page to do it, so it's really well done to kind of keep the story moving, and you get the idea. This, I think, if you're not a longtime reader, you can still read this. It'll introduce you to a lot of characters that you can then go search out and then come back to it. That would be my, come back to it 2 years from now, read it again.
Right. And you'll appreciate it a lot.
Yeah. You'll really appreciate it all over again.
Yeah. It makes me want to dig into that Fantastic Four, Silver Surfer stuff. Because that's
absolutely.
I have some blind spots, even though I love the Fantastic Four, but that whole Silver Surfer saga, I don't really know much about that at all, actually.
Oh, yeah. Mm-hmm. Definitely
just read like the first 30 issues of Fantastic Four, and they're like the best run in comics
that's
ever.
Awesome.
Really, it's really great.
Cool.
And
they set up a lot.
It was really interesting how praised and romanticized the Fantastic Four were. Like you always said, they were the first family of Marvel, and this really hit it home on the dot.
Yeah.
To see that.
Like the royal family with the big wedding and stuff. Yeah, they definitely did a great job.
Oh, yeah. Mm-hmm. Absolutely.
Well,
All
good.
right.
I would say definitely in my book, this is a good read and a reread and a great book to have on your shelf. Thank you for renewing my copy, Andrew.
No problem. Any way you could get the story, read it. Appreciate it.
Yes.
A lot went into it, and just the fallout of this. Like Alex Ross is now one of the biggest icons in art, comic art right now. He's just went on to do so much. And Kurt Busiek, what character hasn't he written?
Yeah, yeah, everything.
Do you guys have a favorite run by that writer?
Not particularly. I haven't did like so much like digging into it, but I would like to go check out his Astro City stuff more. I've read pieces of it and his Conan run. I really want to check that out.
Cool.
Yeah, I mean, he went on to also do the Avengers that are right behind you, Andrew.
Oh yes. So
yeah, yeah, and some of the more popular Avenger runs because
him and George Perez.
Like he handles 20 characters all at once really well. That's just the way he does it.
That's why him and Perez were best buds when they broke.
Yep. George Perez can draw like 100 characters every page.
Good Lord.
Every day. And so they handled some of the bigger storylines out there. But he also just was one of those where people wanted him just to get on a run for 10, 20 issues, revitalize the line, and then he would go somewhere else and just pump out another 10, 20 issues, go to the next one. I mean, he was like the every guy. And he was just good at it. He really cared about the characters, and he really, I think, kept them relevant. Chris Claremont got stuck in the X-Men for 20 years.
Still is.
Yeah. But Kurt's just one of those. There's like 10 people that are just stellar and
timeless.
Yeah, he's one of them.
I guess real quick, Josh, what character, like Marvel, DC, or whatever, would you want to write for?
Definitely Spider-Man for sure.
Okay.
That would be a dream. Not even I mean I love X-Men too, but yeah, Spider-Man would be great. And I would love to do, I mean, obviously anything that had anything to do with Spider-Man, but I would love to do like a graphic novel, like a complete story that I just get to conceptualize start to finish would be really, really amazing.
Awesome.
Yeah, preferably when he's older in life and has some years on him. I prefer that Spider-Man as
absolutely me too. Yeah. Cool. All right. And I think that wraps up. Thanks for coming on the podcast, Josh. We really appreciate it.
Absolutely my pleasure. Thank you guys so much. This was a blast.
Heck yeah. We'll have to do another one soon. And let us know when another project comes up. We really will check it out.
Absolutely.
All right, everyone, get your copy of Josh's book, Twilight Custard, at twilightcustard.com. And everyone read Marvels. We're going to put them right together. There you go.
Yes.
And you're in it. So, well, thank you very much, Josh. This was great.
Thank you. My pleasure.
No problem. This is Bam Powell Comic Hour signing off with Andrew Glonner,
Chris Ramos.
Oops, and Josh Wilson.
Yes. Signing off. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you. Good night. Good night.